What about the role of the body in the process of giving you feedback about not making a spiritual bypass?
You just, in your question,
Yeah.
you just answered the question in your question, is the body is what tells you, right? That's one of the things that's so often left out in spirituality, is your body is telling you what you need to pay attention to. You know, if you, fear's in the body, anxiety's in the body, guilt's in the body, shame's in the body, these aren't just abstract, psychological concept. These are actual direct experiences. And so to me, the body is sort of the place of, in a relative way of speaking, the body is the place of truth. You don't pay attention to what's going on in your body, sooner or later, you've got to. These bodies here are for very good reasons. The body not only tells us, has the truth about what we're experiencing. We're experiencing what we're experiencing. No matter what our mind tells us about it, it's still there. And the body also has an important part to play of, I'm often telling people, you were at the retreating, I tell people all retreat long, get a sense of what I'm speaking about. Get a feel for it. Get a kinesthetic, experience of this. Yes, it's beyond that experience. It's deeper than that experience, but that's your doorway in. So I often say, this all happens from the neck down, to get people, into the sense of things. Because later, even, the funny thing is, when we really awaken, and really awake, and that's being embodied, actually it's the body that in many ways dictates what we do.
What do you mean by that?
The sense, not the concept anymore or the idea, but the sense of the way the truth moves through us. It's a sense. It's a kinesthetic sense. So when we're really awakened beyond the personal self, we're not really in this position like when people are often in a place of making decisions, and they're confused about decisions. And when we're really awake, we don't get so caught in this place of decisions that we still, almost literally in the body, there's just this flow that's leaning one way and leaning the other. It's just sort of moving in one direction. And it's a flow, and it's felt kinesthetically. It's not conceptual in any way. And so this is just one example. The more awake we become, actually our kinesthetic experience is a very direct way that the truth is communicating to us. It's the way it's moving through us. Because, of course, body, form, and formlessness are one,
Say more.
Well, so since they're one, that, the way the formlessness, the revelation of unity moves is very much, it's in the body, and it's felt, and it's experienced, and it's kinesthetic.
After your awakening experience,
yeah,
your own physical form,
yeah,
did it have to go through certain changes in order to be in harmony?
Absolutely.
And, your body itself
yes.
would still have had memories and, as you use the word, conditioning.
Sure.
So what was that process like?
Wow. Well, okay, now I see where you're going. For me, the first thing that happened immediately was it literally felt like there was something or somebody inside my head, like a telephone operator, and just rewiring things. It was just sort of this energetic sense that the whole brain structure was being literally rewired in the way things connect and hook up. And so that was going on in the brain. This really deep sort of rewiring that I had no intellectual understanding of what was going on at all. In the body, of course, there was a lot of energy in the body. There was much more movement, not just of so much of emotion, but of energy was just really freed up. It was much more free-flowing, and sometimes that felt really good, and at times, of course, it didn't feel good when it would run up against energetic blocks. At times it caused a lot of pain. Sometimes I'd had terrible headaches, the top of my head, behind my eyes, different parts, wherever there was blockages. When this gets freed up, it's a tremendous force. of energy, and it kind of runs into blockages and eventually opens them up. But so there was this whole sort of energetic reharmonization actually throughout the body, some of which was pleasant, some of which at times wasn't pleasant,
And this took place over what period of time?
Oh, I would say that was going on for a good 3 or 4 years for me. That it was sort of, harmonizing and clearing out and things. And through that, I found that I had a capacity, just in a very familiar sense for I think a lot of people, my ability to feel was greatly enhanced, and I could actually feel in a much deeper way emotionally. I mean, there was intimacy with everything. Every possible feeling was just I was capable of a much deeper feeling than I had been before. But curiously enough, also with a complete detachment or uninvolvement with the feeling. That's sort of the strange paradox of it, of being almost very far away, but infinitely more intimate with experience than you've ever been with your life. And these two things are happening at the same time.
So did that rewiring continue after your March 17th awakening?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Continued for a period of time.
It continued for years. Like 3 or 4 years after that time. Yeah. Quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And actually, in my case, I think from talking with other people, I had a relatively mild dose. Some people go through some real wild, energetic, unfoldings in the process. And some go through the similar process before they awaken too, like with Kundalini awakenings and stuff. That we can have our Kundalinis the process really start to go before we have awakening as well. But there's always some energetic process that is part of awakening and that follows it. Because our whole body is being kind of put together, or reharmonized, reorganized.
And the basic recommendation is relax?
Let it happen. Yeah, to just relax and let it happen. The reason I say that is because the more I found that people manipulate the process, even people that are highly educated about the process, they've read all about Kundalini and or whatever it is, and they think they know what to do. I've never met anybody that's really sort of in any way manipulating the process that it ever goes anywhere nearly as smoothly as people that just have a deep sort of trust in the inherent nature of what's happening, that it knows what it's doing better than the mind knows what it's doing. So that's why I often say to people, the best thing is just to relax. This stuff knows what it's doing. And if it gets sort of really more chaotic, it's almost always because people are resisting the process or they're afraid of the process. And when they have sort of even an intellectual framework that just lets them know that this process really knows what it's doing, that they relax. And they find that over time it does start to reharmonize. But, for people, I've known a lot of people that, they have awakening and all of a sudden they're only able to sleep 2 or 3 hours a night for 6 months or 2 years or, and when they come to me and they tell me this and I just say, sure, of course. Don't much worry about it. It may be inconvenient, but it knows what it's doing. This thing will come into harmony. Just give it some time. And the more they relax, the faster it comes into harmony.
So you mean the body will come into harmony with the awakened state?
Exactly. Yeah. You see, because the more awake we are, our bodies are physically, we're not just letting go in some abstract realm of spirit, There's a letting go in the body. And for most of us, our bodies, to some extent or another, are sort of like, cans of Coca-Cola that have been shaked up for decades, and they've had the top on. So it's not, there's a lot of forces happening in there, but they're not in a lot of harmony. And so when you take off of the control mechanisms, the suppression, all of that, it's just like, shaking up a can of Coke and opening the top. and this great rush of energy happens, right? And if there's another energetic pattern in its way, it's like if you open up a can of Coke, or say a 50-gallon drum of Coke, and it's spraying up in the air, you put your hand over it, you're going to feel the spray hit your hand, and you're going to feel the resistance. So those pockets will often become noticeable as points of pain or uncomfortableness that'll usually eventually open up. So this happens, this energy, in many different directions, as there's no suppression happening. But over time, just like if you open a can of Coke and it sprays all over the place, it doesn't spray over the place forever, does it? The energy gets sort of released and then comes back into a state of equilibrium. And as bodies, when all of our suppressions are broken loose, very similar dynamic happens. Things open up energetically, but then over time there starts to be a harmonization.
Okay, well, we can't conclude our interview without me hearing, I probably should have put this at the beginning, but I've sort of thought, God, I don't want to ask Adya to tell me his awakening story again. Like, how do you tell it without it becoming a legend or a myth?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But at the same time,
yeah.
It's one thing to read about it, it's another thing to hear you actually describe what happened. Mm-hmm. So can you do that for me, Adya?
Okay, I'll do it. So for me, it was actually very simple, and it actually started before it started, because I think there's one vital element that's not part of the experience, but I saw as very vital, is the night before I was going to sleep, and I sat on the edge of my bed, and I had this thought that wasn't a big thought, wasn't a big insight, it was just the simplest thing, was totally out of context to what I was thinking of at the moment. But this thought just ran through my mind that just said, I'm ready. And I just noted it, and literally within 5 seconds I noted it, and then I went to sleep. But this sense of I'm ready was so plain and so simple, and it wasn't anything like my mind or my ego when it says, I'm ready, and it's like ready to storm gates. It was this innocent, simple, like just a gift. It was just a fact. And it just was a thought, I'm ready. And I thought nothing of it. It didn't really gather much attention except to notice that it was happening. So I went to sleep. I got up early because I was going to go see my teacher. She was teaching, and I used to get up kind of early to do a little meditation before I go to see her. And I sat down, and I wasn't thinking anything particular, and I just sat down, and within 30 seconds, I just heard a bird, just a chirp, and a question that I never, heard, I never practiced, but it just kind of came from my guts rather than from my head. A question just arose, and it said, who hears this sound? And as soon as that question happened, it was like just everything turned upside down, or right side up. In that moment, there was the bird, the sound, and the hearing were all one thing. Literally, their experience is exactly the same. That the hearing was no more me than the sound and the bird than anything. And it was just very quick, very sudden, and it was just one. And so this happened, and then the funny thing is, at least funny to me as awakening stories go, and then I don't know how long that was happening, and then the next thing that was noticed was there was thought, some thought. And it was so distant, I didn't even know what the thought was about, but there was thought, and then there was the recognition that that's not me. It's thought, that's all. And this that woke up, this that was awake, had nothing to do with that thought whatsoever. It was just happening. The two were like completely different. There's zero identity in the thought. And so after a few minutes, then I got up. And I literally had these sort of like 5-year-old, ideas in my head, like very curious. I thought, I wonder if I'm the stove. And so I like trotted out to the kitchen, and I looked at the stove, and sure enough, and it wasn't really like me, but it was like this is the stove. And I trotted into the bathroom and I looked at the toilet. Because I was trying to look for something that was like really unspiritual or something. I'll be damned, it's the toilet. And then I opened the bedroom door and I looked in and Annie was sleeping, my wife, and I went, and it's her. This is her. And it's the same. And I just kind of walked around we lived in a little kind of cottage, 450 square feet we lived in for 6.5 years, and I just looked around this cottage and everything was this. Everything was the same. And then the next thing was, in the middle of that, as I'm just sort of standing there in the middle of and yet there was no, like, emotion. There was no yippee, there was no, oh my God, that was totally, totally absent. And that's why, like I said earlier, the experiential byproduct was completely gone. And so all that was happening was, like, the truth of the fact rather than the byproduct. And so everything was seen totally clearly, not mistaked with any state of experience, because there wasn't any state happening. And then I was walking a few steps in the living room, because the living room was a few steps long, and consciousness completely woke up. Hard thing to describe it. It was completely separated itself from the body. And the body and the mind and the me and the personality was, and at that moment, that's when I saw this string of images of, like, and immediately I knew, and it was like this that was awake knew immediately I've been trapped in those, what we might call incarnations for, that's where I was. I thought those were me. I was asleep in those. And it was so clear that this was not those. It wasn't trapped in those anymore. It wasn't confined to any of the forms, including the current form. And I could see the current form was no more significant or real as, 50 lifetimes ago or whatever. And there it was, just this awakeness, completely only itself, completely just itself. No form, no shape, no color, no nothing, no location, but everywhere. And at that moment there was a knowing that even though that this awakeness was everything, that this awakeness was also beyond being everything. That if everything totally disappeared, all the form, all the stuff that I just saw I was the same as, if it all disappeared, that this would not diminish any, not even a little teeny. It couldn't diminish. And so that was pretty much the awakening. And then it's sort of this sense of being bigger and outside, that the body was happening within that, you call that awakeness or spirit consciousness. The body was in it rather than I was in the body. And then in the midst of that, then this awakeness or consciousness also kind of came back into the body. And it was still outside, but now it was outside and inside. And it sort of took occupancy again. Didn't just stay outside, so it sort of took occupancy again. But it took occupancy without confusion this time. Without any identification. It was like you or me. It was like putting on our clothes in the morning. You just put on clothes. You don't think that you're your clothes, but they're just something you wear. And it was just so clear that this form and this particular personality, this kind of, formerly known as Steve Gray guy, that this was clothing. That's what this incarnation was, just a clothing that this thing was going to wear and function through. And the nice thing was there was such a joy with it. Such a joy with the clothing, with the incarnation, with the personality. There was such an intimacy and such just an absolute childlike joy of just, wow, just almost like a child has, when a girl puts on a Cinderella dress and looks in the mirror and is like, wow, this is so cool. And there was just that sense of just the amazement of form. And then the last thing was, and then I took a step. And it was like the first step I'd ever taken in my life. It felt like I'd just come out of the womb. It felt like a baby that actually put their foot on the ground for the first time in their whole life. And I literally just sort of like looked down at my feet, and I literally just walked in circles because it was just like a miracle, the feeling of the foot on the floor and walking, and it was just like literally this, to put my feet on the floor is a miracle, an absolute miracle. And every step was the first step. Everything was new, and everything had this sense of intimacy and wonder and appreciation. So for me, the way it appeared to me that these things happen in quick succession to each other, the waking up out of the form and then in the form, and then the oneness with the form and the appreciation with form while realizing I'm not form. It was like everything was good. I didn't have to be outside the body. I didn't have to be beyond anything, because everything was this. And I just knew at that time that this is a miracle. I mean, this life, this body, this is heaven. As messy as it is, as silly as it is, as wonderful and terrible as it is, this is the great joke. Walking in God's hand, looking for God.
This concludes Spontaneous Awakening with Adyashanti. Music by Jai Uttal and Ben Leinbach. Thank you for listening.